Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you're able to tune in to this episode of Panel Conversations. My name's Dave Sleet. I'm the Managing Director of A&A Psychological Accreditation. And in this episode, we're going to be joined by three phenomenal professionals and to discuss the impacts and the relationship between the therapeutic arena and social care. I'm going to invite the panel to introduce themselves first off, and then we'll get into conversation. Joe, would you like to introduce yourself first off? I know you're sat in the car at the moment, out in the field, our very own version of K80. So over to you.
Okay, so I'm Jo Liviston. I'm an independent social worker, and I do a mixture of work with fostering and adoption primarily, and also within mental capacity field for adults. So it's a bit of a strange mixture. I'm social work qualified for about 23 years, I think it is now. Wow. So it's been a while. I worked until 2007. I worked directly for local authorities, and then I became independent completely since that time. So it's my work is slightly removed from statutory work currently. But I do a lot of work in courts and things like that, and I also see an awful lot of the outcomes later down the line when people are in care homes or when people are placed for adoption or fostering, when they need supervision, when there are complaints, those kind of issues.
Okay, fabulous. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this and the perception that you have engaging through the independent side of the relationship. Jacqui, over to you.
Hi, my name's Jacqui, and I'm a psychotherapist with a specialism in domestic and sexual violence. I counsel students in school, and I'm sure everybody's going to appreciate, particularly during lockdown, we have had more and more and more referrals surrounding abuse.
Yeah, it's some places have reported up to a 60% increase in demand over the last year. And it's frightening to see how slow the overall system has been able to respond to that, and the pressures that are being exerted on professionals like yourself. And I'm sure we'll touch on that in the conversation this afternoon. Sue, over to you.
I'm Sue Sleet. I am related to David, just for transparency, to get that out the way. I qualified as a social worker in 1988 and was also a foster carer for 9 years before that. I'm now retired from social work, but have an active interest in working with APA on social policy and training.
Okay, so let me bring you all into the room. How's that? So, as Sue just mentioned, APA does have a social care policy contribution as part of our community learning hive and programs that support the social care sector, predominantly children's social care. So there's the link that APA has with the topic. So let me kick off first off by asking a fairly open question. do you believe the perception of social care is accurate, either of the therapy arena or within the therapy arena of social care? Do you think we've got that understanding about right? Or do you think you guys have seen things that go, no, the perception's not quite there? What do you think, Joe?
I would say the perception is nowhere near there in most arenas that I come across. So I would say that cuts both ways, to be honest. I think that there is an awful lot of misperception around what social workers do, what they're allowed to do, what their driving motivation might be for doing whatever they choose to do, and how that comes from a multidisciplinary kind of setting and not just one individual worker. So I think there's a lot of misperception around that. There's also the element of confidentiality and sort of what could be seen as secrecy around court decisions and information about service users or clients or children or whoever you're working with, and whether you're able to share that or not share that. And then it's the other way round. I would say that the perception from a lot of the statutory setting, at least within social work, is that the therapy world is a bunch of people who kind of and ah and nod and say, how do you feel about that, quite a lot.
So actually, let me just cut in on that. So how do you feel about that?
It's frustrating because it's very it's quite a sweeping kind of idea, isn't it, of any professional, really. So I suppose it's I prefer to kind of get to know the individual person and find what their methods are and what their views might be and what their contribution could be to to making an assessment or a decision or whatever I'm doing.
Jacqui, what do you think about the perceptions across the relationship between the two sectors?
I think Joe is spot on, absolutely spot on. It has taken me a long time, and quite a few looked after children, to be able to demonstrate to social services that actually one of the best things that they could do for these children is to give them therapy. To not just say, right, you're going to XYZ for XYZ, and the school will look after you. The school don't know how to do it. There's an expectation from government, from everybody, education, everybody, that the school is equipped to deal with the fallout from students who are, for the most part, either kept in the dark or only hear it really from a parent's point of view, which is not going to be a particularly good point of view if there's a threat of having the children removed. And then school needs to pick that up, and it has to be done so carefully.
So you've had experience of being a carer and then as the professional, and that professional experience running from frontline social work up to team management. Do you think the perception in the eyes of the social care profession around the therapeutic input is almost counterproductive and counterintuitive? From your experience, I mean, I know it's retired, and we're looking back.
I think it has changed over the years.
Okay.
I don't think there's ever been a automatic, every child coming into the system needs therapy, which in hindsight is probably wrong. This idea that the child can be rescued and everything will be fine has gone on for years. I think a child who succeeds in foster care normally succeeds because of a foster carer or because of a social worker who connects with that child, rather than one that comes in and just asks questions. But having said that, in my early days of social work, social workers had done psychology and in some colleges, systemic family therapy as part of their social work course. So they could use those skills. That isn't the case for the last 5 or 8 years, because the courses have changed when they became degree courses, and the systems within social care have changed to make social workers much more caseworkers than are more restrictive in what they can and can't do.
Do you think do you think that kind of case management approach is a response to the change in the education pathway? Or do you think there's a kind of two independent things?
I think they're independent.
Okay.
But I think they have similar knock-on effects. I think for the social worker, it's more, especially frontline workers who are either doing initial assessments or are taking cases to court. The caseloads have gone up dramatically.
Yeah.
And they're still very high, even though governments say they're coming down to 16 per worker.
Yeah, I can see Joe shaking her head.
Who's got 16?
Yeah, I can see Joe shaking her head and Jacqui shaking hers.
Yeah, precisely.
It is, it's a lot of number crunching and everything else. Jacqui, do you see the kind of the move from a vocational setting within the work that you do to what Sue's kind of outlined with the change of the education pathway being kind of academic based, that has an impact on the way that you as a therapist is able to engage with the service?
Yes and no. Because you see, we're theoretically, everything that you say in therapy is confidential, except if they're going to harm themselves or someone else. Okay. So, we've looked after children, particularly who, just say for argument's sake, off the top of my head, from when I used to work in refuge, right? Please don't tell mum I've told you, but. And it could be, yesterday we went to McDonald's and met Dad.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got to tell somebody. I've got to do that. And I have found, particularly in school, and I'm sure Joe and Sue, I would imagine it's the same for you, although the children know that you have to do something, they want you to know so that something can be done.
Yeah.
So there is that sort of holistic part to it, you know, rather than they go and see the social worker and then they come to us. And I have quite a lot of dealings personally with social workers.
And this is, you know, the thing we're seeing more and more is that social workers that haven't got that systemic family psychological support know-how through the education pathway are more and more realizing that they don't have it, and therefore it's something that they reach out for, and the relationship then develops, but it almost develops outside of the system.
Yeah.
Rather than the system that we currently operate in the UK, which has developed into the multi-agency service hubs, aren't they? They're the MASH teams. Joe, do you think that the MASH is producing the connections and the benefits that it was set out for, or do you think there's gaps there?
I honestly don't know, because I've never worked from a MASH team. I've never really had a direct input into one, so I couldn't say. I mean, my feeling is that there's probably gaps. I think a lot of that is dependent on caseloads and management styles, and the system not working terribly well. And
the reason why I asked, because as an independent social worker, that connection would be very, very ad hoc at best. So I was kind of taking a gamble on that, but it shows the perception, and it shows the level of trust, understanding, and believability that the system is able to cope.
Yeah.
And as you were talking, I could see Jacqui kind of nodding her head that, you know, the systems, when we talk about gaps, I mean, they're not just gaps, are they, Jacqui?
No, they're enormous great caverns. You know, I've been to many a MASH, you know, the multi-agency safety hubs, as they used to be called. And every now and again, they just change one of the words. And they're okay if everybody who's in that meeting does what they're asked to do. But then sometimes you'll go to a MASH and there could be me, there could be social work, there's probably police, there's health, there's school, there's a whole multitude. The idea is brilliant. There's a whole multitude of people. So then they say what they're going to do, and then all these things are sent to one coordinator who collates what everybody's done. But I could probably put my last pound on the fact that quite often the MASH are 2 or 3 months behind.
And that pressure load for the professionals in there has just gone through the roof. And we're not talking just about the pandemic here, but it was, I think it was 2018 was the first time where the state across the UK was looking after more than 100,000 young people. You know, that's a frightening kind of development, that you can imagine the Olympic Stadium before it was broken down for what it is now. But when it opened, you could not seat every single looked after child in that stadium. There would be people queuing up outside. That's the extent, that's the pressure. And that gets, once somebody's in that system, if they are under 14, the chances are they will be in that system until they are 21. That's a long time for a dependency to build up. And if we don't have that therapeutic component and understanding being woven in there, the outcome for the MASH team is, as you say, months behind. But lives don't go on pause waiting for the system to catch up.
My sentiments exactly. It's like going to court, and I'm sure you have, Sue, and I'm sure you have, Joe, in the past. You go to court, just for argument's sake, in DV, there was an incident 3 days ago. So you're in court for an emergency non-molestation injunction, and the judge doesn't have all the details.
Yeah.
Because it was a few days ago. We haven't managed to write up the report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another difference in when I started practicing in the 80s and 90s to now, because it didn't matter then what you had on your plate. That report was for court, and it had to be provided to the legal department 24 hours before court.
Yeah.
And again, I'm sure it's about changes in people's perceptions that courts don't matter for social workers in the same way as they used to, in that for the younger social workers, social work is more, my job's 9 to 5, I might have to go over till 6 or 7 occasionally, but I don't have to break my back because my job doesn't say I have to give up all my free time. And, you know, I know Dave will know of whole weekends and bank holidays where I was writing care plans and saying, your dad will take you out.
What was a weekend? What was a weekend?
Well, for me, it didn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure it doesn't for you sometimes, Joe. You know,
most of the time it doesn't.
Exactly. I can
Most of the
remember, it's not that long ago that I was actually working in refuge. I say not that long ago. It's 7 years since I last worked in refuge. But I worked in one particular refuge where we knew that there was somebody who was going and visiting the perpetrator every weekend without fail, because there was nobody in the refuge at the weekends. So social care said, well, you're going to have to prove it. We can't do anything. You're going to have to prove it. So we said, okay. So what we did was we asked the police, local police, to go and do a welfare check. They rang up and they said, yeah, she's absolutely fine. Right, okay. Who's she with? Oh, we don't know. Why don't you know? Because we phoned up. I said, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
You are ringing somebody from refuge. She could be anywhere in the whole of the UK. We've asked you to go and do a welfare check and you phoned her up.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but we know she's safe.
Yeah. And it's that kind of that multi-agency, multi-discipline breakdown from awareness to operations that when we've looked at the serious case reviews, every single time there will be those examples. And however many times a copy and paste of regulations and upgrades of points of focus are made, we're seeing copy and paste over and over again, and there is a reframing of systems rather than a changing of protocols.
Absolutely.
Do you think that the operational kind of professionalism has taken away the vocational kind of motivation that a lot of people that come into both the therapeutic arena and the social care arena start with?
I think it has. Yeah.
What for me as a psychological coach, I see a lot of people with great intentions and great motivations and real heartfelt sentiment coming into a system that's in survival mode.
Yes.
And it breaks them quicker when they're not able to activate that vocational approach that they're coming in with. And then it becomes an impact on the service user, the client, that then just ripples and the situation gets worse. Do you think, just taking the refuge dynamic as an example, do you think we've lost sight of the impacts of the abuse environment on all of the component parties within that environment, because the system is focused on one element within the environment?
I would say, without a doubt, when it comes to family court, yes. I've yet again had an email from somebody that I've worked with on a pro bono basis, had an email today telling me, and I don't even know her actual real name because it's family court, telling me that the judge has agreed with perpetrator's solicitor and said that because she was never physically hit or didn't end up in A&E, it wasn't abuse.
Disgusting.
Absolutely.
And there is clear misunderstanding about what abuse is, and when we look back at the history of legislation in the UK, this started, or all of the legislation started to address abuse in the home. It wasn't tagged as domestic violence. There is nothing domestic about violence. No. It's a misnomer label that allows people to hide the reality because the system doesn't want, in my humble opinion, it doesn't want to look at the evilness that is abuse. And we see that with the label of child abuse. We see that with the label of domestic abuse as well. Do you think, Joe, that when we're working with young people who have been through the experience of abusive arenas, there is a kind of a misnomer around the impact that that's had on them? It's almost treated as though once they're rescued, as Sue put it, and they're in a different environment, then that's it. They're safe now. There should be no impact.
I think it depends. I think it's variable, and a bit of a postcode lottery, largely dependent, in my experience, on the individual workers that happen to be involved with that particular young person and what agencies they're sort of working through and what their culture is.
Yeah.
So in some places it's awful, and it's kind of, especially if children are removed quite early, it's kind of, oh, you know, well, they'll be okay then. There won't be the same sort of impact on them because they won't remember, etc. Or, you know, you can get everything from that to people that are really quite aware that actually any kind of removal of a child at any age will have an impact on them.
Yeah. I mean, trauma is held in the brain at whatever stage it comes. And, you know, you can take that right back to, you know, the moments before birth. And,
Yes.
you know, Siobhan gives a really great example of this. So I hope she doesn't mind me kind of pinching it for this. But a child that is born with the umbilical cord around its neck, trapped, totally dependent on other people, totally unable to deal with the situation, verbalize it, etc. When that individual is put into an environment where they are trapped, they are unable to control the scenario, they are dependent on other people, they will more than likely experience a trauma response, whether that emerges as a panic attack, but it might be the first time as an adult or as a young person they've been in that situation, but the pre-birth or the, you know, the birth moment will impact on that.
Yeah.
And it's something that if we aren't able as therapeutic professionals to engage in raising that psychological awareness of the impact of trauma to the social care professionals, then ultimately are we not doing a disservice not only to our own profession, but also to the people that the social care teams are having to work with?
Two things, I think, Dave. One, we are doing a disservice, and I think we've often done a disservice in that way. I think the other is a slightly different approach, is when social workers convince a parent they need to leave a situation with their children, and it's you either leave or we take you to court to protect the child. You then have them, sometimes through housing, not going to a refuge, but going to an alternative authority. The support systems are then disengaged. They've up and put a family, say from London to somewhere like Bolton, and the family are left. There's no support unless that mother is able to find it herself. And that is very wrong, both for the mother, who is now isolated, and
in essence, it's replicated what the initial environment was attempting to create.
yeah,
And it just amplified it, because
well,
now you've got everybody else involved as well, but you've done exactly the same. Isolate, cut them off, put them in a situation where they're not in control.
Also, that authority, when they get involved, because the mother has been vulnerable, has been targeted, and has moved a new boyfriend in who is violent, she is then deemed as unfit because she only ever has violent partners, and no support has been put in to help her understand what her triggers are for and her vulnerabilities for attracting that sort of person.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pick up on the point of, you know, those kind of connections. Jacqui, we've had conversations in the past about how school is used as a contact point for social care, and what that does to a child that's in that situation is the equivalent of giving them a big red flag for all of their peers to go, there's a reason why we can have a pop at you.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think that because the system has got into the self-defense mode and we're using the school environment as that contact point, that we are driving young people further and further away from the support systems?
I think sometimes because social care have a bad press at times, and particularly if they've been involved with social care before, and then they're being told, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody, we don't want this or we don't want that, but thankfully in my school, the students can and will talk. They will see it as somewhere that they can tell somebody what they're being told not to say.
Yeah.
Safely. They know we have to do something. And like I said before, a lot of the time they want somebody to know. And one of the things that we also do in my school with children that are in that situation, like exactly as Sue was saying, they pick somebody up, they move them somewhere and they go, right, okay. And then 3 or 4 weeks later, mum's got this lovely new boyfriend who is everything she wants him to be. And she gets housed and he goes, oh, thanks very much. Let's move in together, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying it's only he, because I know women are capable of abusing as well. But in this scenario, it's a man. And social care will then say, well, how much do you know about him? Oh, yeah, I know this, I know that, blah, blah, blah. Social care know everything about the person and say, you can't do this. So then we have another tug of war. Am I right, Sue? We have another
very much so.
So one of the things that we do at my school is prevention work, because otherwise those children that sit with me and quite often make me want to come home and cry my eyes out or go round and brick the parents' window. Sorry.
You didn't say that, Jacqui.
Yeah, the thousands and thousands of fans around the world are shocked.
I think it's fair to say that anyone working with children, young people and the elderly come home at night and either cry or feel angry on behalf of their client or whoever it is they're involved with, and often will express, if I wasn't the person I am, I'd go and brick their windows.
Yeah.
As much as the clients will threaten to do it to the social workers.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I want to kind of pay special mention to Sammy Woodhouse and the campaign that she's running to support the young victims of grooming and abuse that have, as a result of their abuse, been brought into the criminal justice system. APA, along with many other organisations, has already stated that we believe that when a young person is the victim of abuse, they will carry out acts to survive within that environment. Yes, there should be responsibility for the impacts of which that has caused, but it should always be balanced with the individual's environment to survive. And if they are being groomed for any length of time, and part of that involves criminal activity, then at some point, just as we've seen around the world, those criminal records should be sealed. If they are not sealed, then they should be quashed. Once that young person has been through the support systems to ensure that they are in recovery from those behaviors, because we know that if someone is groomed into a behavior, that they have to be groomed out of it. Otherwise, that survival instinct will be with them for a very long time. APA supports Sammy Woodhouse and that campaign, and we would like to see more professionals joining that and supporting that process. But what do you as a panel, as professionals, what do you think about almost the resistance to acknowledging that the young people that are groomed in that environment should be protected from that environment?
I would say it's classic victim blaming that we see across all ages, and I think it's essentially the same problem, but with young people at the centre of it.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I also think there should be some there needs to be some psychological evaluation, because for some of these young people, there is a certain weakness that has been manipulated by the groomer.
Yeah.
And therefore, that very specific support needs to get put in place.
Yeah.
But I also think there's another side of it, which is if that young person, through what they've been involved in, becomes pregnant and chooses to keep their child, but wants to separate from the abuser, social care in some instances are putting a lot of pressure on them for allowing contact with the abuser, to the extent, I certainly know of a couple of cases where they've said, if you don't allow this contact, we will remove your child because you're not acting in the child's best interest. And
parental alienation.
Wrong.
Parental alienation, isn't it, is what they're labelling it at the moment.
Yeah.
And
it often
ultimately becomes system authorized alienation from the parent that's saying, actually, this was an abusive environment and I'm protecting my child from an abusive environment. But also that perpetrators use that to continue the abuse. And not every parent is a good parent for their child. And the perception within the legal system that every parent has the right to do what they want, when they want, where they want, because they have parental rights, ignores parental responsibility.
Absolutely. The most abhorrent for me is parents that have sexually abused their own children and are in prison. Their mothers are still expected to facilitate contact, even if it's in prison.
Yeah.
And I can't, abuse is abhorrent in any form. But for a parent to sexually abuse a child and then demand parental rights and the law gives it to them, I think is a real disservice to every single one of those children.
Yeah, totally.
Disservice to the protective parent as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb, and I think when the system uses shadow or umbrella terms because it doesn't want to deal with the realities of child rape, child torture, child manipulation, child starvation, child imprisonment, and wants to say, no, there's a parent, and therefore that right oversees, you would not put an adult victim of those same crimes into that situation where they have to go and see the perpetrator of their abuse. You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it to an adult. Don't do it to a child.
I'd agree. And I can recall using those terms in the High Court in front of a very senior judge who told me I was using inappropriate language.
There is a massive fear rides across the relationship between social care, justice, and the therapeutic sector.
Yeah.
And I think as we look to kind of bring this forward, how can we as professionals, and there's just 4 of us in the room, but how can we as professionals address that and move things into a positive footing for all 3 component parts? Joe, what do you think?
Oh, blimey, it's like $1 million question, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. All ideas will remain the ownership of those that speak the idea.
Oh, I mean, I would say it's a very big ask. And I think the only thing you can do maybe as individuals is kind of raise the awareness as much as possible with the people that you have contact with on a kind of individual basis. And I suppose the more people that do that, then the more that will seep out to others as well, almost like a union theory, I suppose.
Yeah. One mind at a time.
Yeah. There is joint training, but it's never offered to those in the private sector. So unless they're on any particular network, like through a school or something like Jacqui does, but unless, and there isn't the money in social care anymore to send staff on specialist training in the way they used to be. And there isn't the money to send young people or even parents to specialist therapists outside of CAMHS. And CAMHS will do an assessment and 9 times out of 10 say nothing we can do, or come back in a year when the child's life has stabilised.
Yeah.
And
like life stabilizes for anybody in a situation where you've had to have an assessment with CAMS.
yeah.
Jacqui, do you think that there is the scope for the almost an overhaul of the training awareness, so that it's not a kind of training after qualification, but actually part of the qualification process for both therapists and for social care?
Yeah, in terms of social care, I know somebody who's studying in inverted commas to be a social worker at the moment, albeit like this, and their statutory training in DV is 4 hours.
And we wonder why there is a problem, and we wonder why we have a tsunami of backlog.
And they are advised to take up other CPD, basically reading, listening, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's not very in depth. The other thing I think that ought to be taught to students, and actually anybody in social care, is that sadly, you were saying about CAMS. CAMS can only offer currently 6 sessions.
Yeah.
If it's a complicated case, they can offer another 6, providing there's not more than a 6-month waiting list. At the moment, it's a minimum of 9 months.
Yeah.
If they're suicidal or have tried to commit suicide, in my area, North Essex, it's 4 months. And then they're offered group work.
Yeah.
So it's being able to say to social care, it's all very well telling parents, you refer your child to CAMS and then their behaviour will get better. They need to know what the waiting lists are for CAMS. They need to know who to get the information from.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
I'd agree.
That's one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? The actual information that professionals have to hand, up to date, accurate, and I want to say efficient, but all of the information's available, but we're not very efficient at actually making it available where it's needed, when it's needed. One of the things,
or in multi-languages.
Yes.
And the flexibility of language, everything else, and accessible for those that can't read.
Yes.
And we've seen a rise in that across the UK in recent years. So there are some things that we can look forward to. There are some things that APA has already put on the table that are there to help. So for anyone who's watching this going, oh my God, it's a disaster out there, it's a mess, hold up, wait a minute, there are solutions. Jacqui has a program that supports counselling into education, and that is endorsed by APA already. It's a phenomenal package, and we will have a in conversation with episode in the next few weeks with Jacqui to go through counselling in education. Sue has produced an outline framework for social care policy and process for first point of contact with a new family. And that point of contact assessment reduces the current process from 12 weeks to 10, it puts live reality checks into play, so the system can understand what are the flashpoints for a family and when are those flashpoints, not a pseudo assessment in a contact center at a set time where the family are expected to perform like dolphins at SeaWorld. Well, SeaWorld stopped making dolphins jump through hoops. It's about time we stopped making humans and children do the same. And APA has produced training packages for the social care sector that link to psychological resilience in a way that's not been done before. So there, straight off the bat, are 3 really positive measures that social care can reach into and make a difference right now. And Joe, I know that you and the team at APA are going to be looking at the DOLS process, the fostering and adoption engagement, and we will be working on that in the near future too.
Good to know.
So everyone around this table has already got positive contributions to make to this arena. And anyone that watches this, please share this out to those, your colleagues, those that work in the arena, and let them know that they are not on their own. March is Social Work Month. Let's make this month the time when the psychological arena is backing up those social care professionals in a way that they can get the best result for the people that they're working with. Because ultimately, those young people are going to be part of the tsunami that becomes psychologically requiring therapeutic support as they become adults. And if we cannot stem that tide, the psychological arena will not be able to cope either. We've got to work together in a way we haven't done before. We've got to take the self-defense away. We've got to start collaborating. Ladies, thank you so much for your time this evening. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. It's nice to talk across disciplines as well.
Yeah.
It is.
Do you see? It can happen, people. You don't
Exactly.
have to
Yes,
just
it
talk
can.
in your silos.
And also, can I just add, it's
Push
even easier nowadays, because where people used to say, oh, we can't send our staff on training because not only have we got to pay them for the day, we have to pay for the training, and they're all going to be out in the office. It's 100 miles away. It doesn't matter now if it's in Australia, because it can be done exactly the way we are doing it today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there has been a massive underspend on social care support training packages for a year. It's time that money got used, and the programs that were in play in 2019 sure as hell ain't gonna be up to the job for 2021. It's time to do something new. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If there is anything that you have learned, gained, that you can use in your practice, whether that's in social care, whether that's in the therapeutic arena, get yourself a copy of the CPD validation certificate document, get that back to us, get the CPD for this session. But you have to let us know what impact this has had on your practice. No CPD like confetti from A&A. So, ladies, have a great evening. Joe, thank you very much for being out there in the cold and remaining with us. I look forward to speaking to you all in the near future. And for everyone else, we'll see you soon.
Night,
Thank
folks.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.